Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to Jericho Road, where we're looking at the world of Jesus through the Gospel of Mark. And in this episode, we're going to take a break and recap four pillars of what we've learned so that we can understand the story a little more deeply. We're also taking a break because in the next three episodes, which gets us close to Christmas, we're going to tell stories about Bethlehem, Mary, and Joseph. So it'll be a little bit of a Christmas break, and then we'll return to the Gospel of Mark after the first of the year. But what I want us to do this morning is look at three foundational stones to the Galilean ministry of Jesus, meaning that you can't really understand what set the world on fire until you know these. And the first one of these is the Hebrew concept of time and how Jesus turned their idea on its head. Now, I want to show you a picture of a trail going from Chorazin to Capernaum. Jesus would have walked this trail. It goes downhill about 2 miles, 2.5 miles to the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus would have walked with his disciples. The crowds would have followed him. This is where he would have fed people with a few crumbs of bread and fish and made their world electric with his preaching. And to understand what he's saying, we need to understand the Hebrew concept of time. In fact, it is their gift to Western civilization, this notion that we live in recorded time. Let me see if I can give you a good analogy. One little good idea begets another good idea, begets another good idea, begets another good idea. At the turn of the last century, there was a remarkable invention that probably will get right by you, but it was in 1904, the invention of the vacuum tube. Just a little bitty glass tube with a vacuum in it with electricity running through, and that's about all I understand of what it does, but it became crucial to the development of sound recording and also amplification, which means that now a single musician could fill a concert hall with one instrument. That's one main reason why it was important. But it was also especially good with one form of music called the Delta blues, with one guitarist and a vocalist. And this was a music that became really popular from the 1920s through World War II. The problem is that no one could hear it in the Jim Crow era of the United States, or very few people could hear it, so wasn't on the airwaves, it wasn't a part of popular music, except it was great in Britain. British kids loved this stuff because they could hear it, and they loved it, and they copied it again and again and again, which means that in the mid-1960s, we have a phenomenon called the British invasion. Thanks to the vacuum tube and its development through American music, not listened to in America by a larger audience, but by British kids, they brought it over to us in a new form. Hence the Beatles, hence the Stones, hence the Who. I think even Jerry and the Pacemakers, they all came over playing the Delta blues music that they'd all been raised on, made possible by the vacuum tube. Hey, the vacuum tube is why we have rock and roll. Well, same thing happens with the Bible. It's like a little invention given to Western thought, because ancient people living at the time of those Hebrew writers who first started recording stories didn't think in linear time. They didn't think in a straight line. They thought in cycles and in wheels. You can look at old inscriptions and they'll say that the king reigned for 1,000 years. But no, he didn't. But they didn't care. They were just using time as a word, but not really as a concrete concept. And so what the Hebrews would do is they would record time. Abraham lived, Abraham walked, Abraham died, for two reasons. One, they wanted you to know that if God did something once, God would do it again. Now, back in Mark chapter 11, in a previous episode, we looked at Jesus entering the Temple Mount in Jerusalem last week of his life, and what Jesus does is he overturns the money changers in the temple. He says, "You've turned my house into a den of robbers." And what would have excited them is that they knew the story. Some 600 years before Jesus' birth, Jeremiah said the same thing in the same place. "You have turned my house into a den of robbers." If God did something once, God will do it again. Jesus is simply reminding them that these stories are coming true again, that God is in living color again, that God is at work in their world again. But there's another reason why Jesus set their world on fire. And it's because the Hebrew people also believed that if time would be linear, time would also end one day. They called it the day of the Lord. The end of time would be God's last word. So at the end of time, there would be justice. At the end of time, there would be judgment. At the end of time, there would be equality with no pain and no tears. But Jesus arrives in Galilee with one more message with regards of time. Now remember, they already knew if God did something once, God would do it again. They already knew that God had a last word called the day of the Lord. And this is Jesus' first announcement in his arrival in Galilee. It's Mark chapter 1, beginning with the 14th verse. Now after John was arrested, Jesus came to Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God and saying, "The time is fulfilled, that the kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news." This was mind-blowing to them because Jesus was saying that in him, the day of the Lord has arrived under their noses. The best analogy I can come up with from our own history is D-Day, June 6, 1944. The war in Europe was won when our soldiers secured the beachhead in Normandy. Now, it wasn't won that day. It would be won. You could see the end from here. There would have to be another year of war. There would have to be another year of suffering. There'd have to be another year of struggle. But you could see the end from here. It was a rescue operation in time. The same thing happens with Jesus and his message. We know, just as they did, there's still a lot wrong with the world. But in Jesus, a rescue operation has begun. And another way to say it is that the world has got a lot of heaven in it. Thanks to God in Jesus, if we only look around. We don't have to wait for heaven until we die. We can find the kingdom of God under our noses in time. That's the first foundation stone of this message of Jesus in Galilee and how he turned their world on fire. The second pillar I want us to talk about is the pillar of authority. I'll show you a picture of an early church, 4th century church built upon tombs where a man lived. He had 1,000 demons in his mind, and Jesus healed him here. And so late Roman people would record this place with the church, and pilgrims have been coming ever since. And I show this to you because Jesus' first miracle was an exorcism. And it was a remarkable exorcism because they had exorcists in those days. They had people who could do that sort of thing. But this was no incantation. This was simply a command. Be silent. Come out of him. Jesus speaks a word. The demons are gone. His first healing is a healing of Simon Peter's mother-in-law from a fever. Again, no elaborate incantation, no candles, no scrolls, no crowds even. He just simply takes the woman's hand and she gets up and begins to serve them, which is all she ever wanted to do. There are two storms in Mark's gospel, Mark chapter 4, Mark chapter 6. We learned that the Sea of Galilee is the lowest freshwater lake on planet Earth, and it sits in a bowl. Wind gets in there and whips around. It can be dangerous in a boat there, but Jesus stills two storms to show them that he has power over storms. Just as he has power over storms outside of us, he has power over storms within us. Like the demoniacs living in the tombs, Jesus speaks a word, and all of our storms are gone with authority. As I like to say to my congregation here at St. Luke's, at any given time, we are either in a crisis or coming out of a crisis or headed into a crisis, which means that Christ has the authority to still storms. But I can't let this pillar go without talking about demonic possession because it seems so odd to us, even though it does reveal Jesus' authority. In Galilee, in the world of Jesus, demonic possession was ascribed to just about anything that they didn't understand that would hurt us or hold us back. They lived for centuries among Gentiles around them that also were quick to ascribe demonic possession. So it was a cultural marker, a cultural phenomenon or description in Galilee. And in the case of Mark chapter 5, where the old late Roman church was built, a man was living in the tombs with so many demons in his mind that he told Jesus that his name was Legion. Now, right above these tombs, there's a Greek city called Hippos, and it's one of the cities of the Decapolis. It was a Greek-speaking trading outpost, if you will, who hired retired Roman legionnaires as a security force. And I want to show you a cool little tie-in that we can maybe make with this gospel story. This picture is from the barracks of these Roman soldiers, these retired soldiers who would live there and become, in effect, the police force for the city of Hippos, for this trading city. Now, remember that when Jesus asks the man, the demon's names, he says, "My name is Legion." It's quite possible that this suffering soul in the tombs below the city was a soldier suffering from PTSD, a lifetime of murder and mayhem that had driven him out of his mind, a storm we cannot even comprehend, and yet Jesus heals him and restores him with authority. And then the man begs to follow Jesus. He wants to be a disciple, to return to the Jewish side of the lake and follow him from city to city, preaching the good news. And Jesus says, "No, I want you to go and tell your neighbors and tell your friends all that God has done for you." Now that's in Mark chapter 5. Later, in Mark chapter 8, some 3 chapters later, after Jesus has some adventures, he returns to this side of the lake and feeds 4,000 people, which means that the man in the tombs went and did just as Jesus told him, and he could sell. He went and told everyone what God had done for him, and 4,000 people came to greet Jesus on that side of the lake because of a new disciple in a new place. That's the second pillar of the story, which is the authority to still storms and to set us on new adventures. Now, he did tell the man in the tombs to go tell his neighbors and his friends, but he doesn't always want people to know, which brings us to the third pillar or foundation stone of the Gospel of Mark, and that is something called the Messianic Secret. I'll show you a picture of a house. This is actually the house of the first miracle of Jesus. This is Simon Peter's house. You're looking at it. Simon Peter's mother-in-law was healed of a fever right there in chapter 1. And after this miracle, Simon Peter's house is simply referred to as the house over and over and over again. It becomes a marker where either miracles happen or where the disciples can use this house as a base of operation. And what I want you to notice when you read these early stories, especially the early excitement of the ministry in Galilee, that whenever Jesus heals or performs an exorcism, he tells them, "Don't tell anyone." Or he tells them, "Go to the priest and present yourself, but don't tell anyone what I did." Unlike the Gentile across the lake, the Gentile, the Roman soldier that I like to imagine, suffering in the tombs, he's told to go and tell because it's no threat out there. But on the Jewish side of the lake, it's a threat indeed. And so this is a feature of the gospel called the Messianic Secret. It comes from the word Messiah. Messiah is a Jewish idea that a leader would come at some point in time to lead them to a messianic age, which simply means to get rid of everything that was hurting them, which means that in the world of Galilee, that would be the Romans. There is a story that we told in a previous episode about messiahs. About 100 years after Jesus, a revolutionary leader named Simon Bar Kokhba led a successful revolt against the Romans. They called him a messiah. In fact, Bar Kokhba is the name they gave him. It means son of a star, which references Numbers 24, which is a messianic dream. This messiah didn't end well. It took the Romans a couple of years to get their act together, but they came down and they crushed the movement and killed hundreds of thousands of people. And so in this tense and expectant time of the world of Jesus, where they want the Romans gone, Jesus could not afford to be misunderstood. He was to be a Messiah, yes, but a different kind of Messiah, a suffering Messiah, like the dream of Isaiah 53 Messiah, not a soldier or a warrior Messiah. So now, with this pillar understood, scenes like Mark 6:45 make sense. It goes like this. After the feeding of the 5,000 on the Jewish side of the lake, feeding of the 4,000 on the Gentile side of the lake, he feeds 5,000 on the Jewish side of the lake, and he, quote, immediately makes the disciples get into the boat and go to Bethsaida. Hey, even though a storm is coming and he'll have to save them from that, he makes them immediately get into the boat to go to Bethsaida. In other words, they got to get out of there. On the Gentile side of the lake, the good news of Jesus is no threat. They've never heard the good news before. On the Jewish side, it's dangerous. Finally, there's a scene from Mark chapter 9 that comes later. It's in the house. The disciples are all wondering who amongst them would be the greatest, which is exactly opposite of what Jesus is teaching again and again, which is why he has to keep his identity a secret, because they can't understand. And in Mark chapter 9 verse 33, we read this. I'll read it to you. When they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, the same house we just saw, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and he said to them, I can imagine his exhaustion, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." And then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." They're back in the house, and this is Simon Peter's house. And what I want you to imagine is this is Simon Peter's kid. He took the child of the house in his arms, which would be Simon Peter's kid, which means that Simon Peter would go on to be the rock upon Christ would build his church. But Simon Peter would always remember the day that Jesus took his kid in the house and showed him how it all worked. Which brings us to the fourth and final pillar of how to understand a gospel story. The pillar is simply this: healing is restoration to God and each other. I'll show you a pic of a beautiful mural, very arresting mural in Magdala, which is a scene of the healing of a woman who had a hemorrhage. And it's Mark chapter 5, and what's beautiful about this mural is it's huge. It's bigger than life size. There's a tiny little altar in front of it where you can celebrate the Eucharist with this drama behind you. What I want to say about this healing, or any healing for that matter, is that Jesus didn't perform tricks to prove his existence. Rather, Jesus healed people so that they could overcome barriers. An important concept in the Galilee, and indeed all the Jewish world, would be the concept of unclean. Unclean. In their world, to call something unclean simply means that it was unfit for the worship of God and unfit to be around other people, because unclean can make you unclean. The word is used over 100 times in Leviticus, so it is a big, big deal. And in Mark chapter 5, where we learn the story of the woman who was healed of a hemorrhage by touching the hem of Jesus' cloak, we're also told the story of a little girl who was dying. Jesus was on his way to heal a dying girl, and he's touched by the woman, which means that these are two stories interlocked with each other, two stories that interpret each other in sort of a sandwich. So Jesus is supposed to heal a sick girl